To see so many people in the room. This is being recorded. Welcome today. My name is Kelly Yard. I'm a partner at Design Lab Architects and one of the two co-chairs for this year's BSA Honor and Awards Committee. I co-chair with Tom Chung, who wasn't able to be here, but just want to give kind of a brief orientation to this project, or this award. So the Honors and Awards Committee, the majority of what we do is really elevating people to be nominated for other awards at the BSA and the AIA level. But the Flansburgh Award is one that we get to really be a part of the selection. So it's something that's really meaningful to us, and we're always really excited to share with the broader community. So as a backup, the Flansburgh Award was named after Earl R. Flansburgh, who had a very long, distinguished career in Boston, and over 45 years was a real supporter and advocate for emerging professionals, women in the field, and they created this award in his honor to celebrate somebody under 40 who's kind of making big impacts at a young age. So. I'm going to let this year's winner, Calvin, introduce himself and all of his work, but I just wanted to start with a few takeaway reflections from the awards committee who made the selection. The first, just really celebrating and honoring how his values-driven design is really evident both in his individual work and also his professional work. To see the continuity there is really beautiful. His capacity to merge kind of a really thoughtful social agenda with also action-oriented, kind of passion-driven cultural agendas is very evident and impressive at the scale he's able to tackle these. And they just reflected, like, if we're looking forward at what architects need to be in the future and what we really need to keep our field relevant and impactful moving forward, that the ability to join skillful design with also the pressing issues of the time is going to be more and more important. So we certainly saw that in Calvin's work, and I'm really excited to hear from him firsthand and have some conversation at the end. And with that, I invite Calvin to take it away.
All right, thanks, Kelly. I'm going to try to get my screen situated in hopefully 30 seconds or less. Just give me a little bit.
And as he's doing that, we definitely want to have some time at the end for a dialogue. So if you have questions along the way and want to send them in the chat, just so that we have kind of a list we can draw from at the end, we welcome you to do that. And there will also be an opportunity to kind of raise your hand and ask the question at the end as well.
All right, Kelly, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to hide everyone's faces. All right, thank you. My name is Calvin. I'm an architect and associate at Payette, and I'm super excited to be presenting today. And again, thank you, Kelly, for the very generous introduction. And thank you, honestly, to the BSA for giving my work a platform. I'd also like to thank any family, friends, or coworkers that have also joined the call. Most, if not all, of the work within couldn't have been done without you. And just fair warning, today this is going to be very informal. It's going to be a little bit less of a lecture and more like anecdotal story time, but I hope that's okay. So to me, the most logical way to sort of start this presentation is to answer a question. How did I get here? And how did this award come to my attention? I was encouraged to apply by a mentor, Andrea Love, who changed my opinion of the Flansburgh Award and what a successful portfolio could honestly look like. And in August of 2023, she sent me a brief email that said, "Have you considered applying for the Flansburgh Young Designers Award? I think you might be able to put together a strong application." And so at the time, I was 29. I had less then 3 years of experience sort of post grad school, and I thought she had honestly sent the email to the wrong person. So in the most professional way I could muster, I replied back pretty much saying, isn't that award for people, that are 5 to 10 years older than me? Paraphrasing a little bit, but I was serious. I had visited the webpage for the award before, and all of the past winners were associate principals or above, or people that own their own practices, like Kyle Barker from last year. And that just wasn't me. I am a fairly confident person, but not delusional. And so she wrote me back this long paragraph about how design awards are less about flashy portfolios and hefty resumes and are more about impact, and how there are numerous ways to contribute to the profession outside of being the design lead on a building. And don't worry, you don't need to read all of that, because essentially the summary is I said what I said. And so I didn't end up applying in 2023, but I did get the ball rolling on my 24 application about 8 months later. And from the start, I knew I'd have to bend the rules a little bit to create a compelling submission. While I fully agree with Earl Flansburgh's philosophy that a well-designed building improves the quality of our lives, most of my personal work doesn't involve buildings at all. Instead, my mission for the past 5 years has been to improve the several pain points of our profession so that we can continue to produce well-designed buildings. And really, put another way, it's my belief that a well-designed profession is what will guarantee the success of future generations and maybe even carry out justice along the way. And because we can all appreciate a good diagram, this is how I tend to think about the collective goal of good design. Similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs from psychology, while we may want to achieve the items listed at the top of this pyramid, uh, they just won't be in any sustainable way without first tackling the items below. Consistently good design cannot occur unless our profession is thoughtfully designed to enable it. And a profession that directly impacts such a diverse array of people and communities cannot perform optimally unless those impacted individuals have a permanent seat at the table. And moreover, I truly believe that accommodating the most vulnerable will only lead to structural changes that benefit all architects and designers. And so as a result, my Flansburgh portfolio took the form of a catalog of projects, both big and small, that contribute towards building a seat at the table for those historically excluded. And the work within can be loosely organized into the following four categories: increasing access and eliminating barriers, ensuring retention of the least visible, navigating the uncomfortable, and continuously raising the ethical bar. And as you can see, there were many different projects that sort of made it in the portfolio. However, I'll only be touching on the highlighted ones today. Lastly, as I go through the work, you'll notice a few people's names listed on some of the slides, because architecture is a team sport. No one does this work alone. So section one, increasing access and eliminating barriers. So for years, the concept of expanding the pipeline has been top of mind for architects, with the primary focus being on raising awareness of the field among more diverse populations. However, several more barriers to entry abound. Education is one of those first barriers. A career in architecture typically requires a college degree, and many cannot afford the degree, but also to participate in pricey architecture summer camps or unpaid internships to gain the exposure and experience necessary to assemble a competitive portfolio. And I'm proud to say this is where the BSA and the Private Industry Council step in. So the council, or just the PIC, is the city's workforce development board, and it serves as an intermediary between Boston Public Schools and future employers. More specifically, PIC staff are career counselors that help high school juniors and seniors find relevant employment opportunities across several disciplines, but including architecture. And for students interested in design and construction, the BSA and PIC jointly organize an internship fair each spring and match as many students as possible with the participating member firms. So currently, I think Payette, Goody Clancy, Elkis, Bergmeyer, Page, Road, Feingold, and Lears Weinzapfel all participate. And from 2022 to 2024, I helped facilitate this internship at Payette. It's a 6-week time commitment that's paid, so students don't feel pressured to supplement the internship with another job. And we just ask that the students are independent, motivated, curious, and have a genuine interest in design. There is absolutely no experience needed, and at Payette, students engage in a design curriculum instead of doing project work. And over the course of the 6 weeks, this curriculum covers design skills like drafting, sketching, and 3D modeling, in addition to professional development skills like mentorship lunches, interviewing design staff, and giving presentations. The program is a great opportunity for students to learn what it takes to be successful in an office environment and decide whether architecture is the right path for them. Every student is different. We've had students go on to study architecture at Northeastern, as well as enroll in trade school. Both are successful outcomes, especially for students coming from the non-exam schools in Boston. But the program isn't just helpful for the students, it's also a crash course on project and people management for myself and my peers. This is a snippet of our PIC mural board from 2024, and I know you can't read it, but my coworkers, Emily, Laura, Shreya, and I would map out how much time needed to be dedicated to each learning module, whether it was design discovery, skills workshops, or office engagement. And we'd have to find designers in the office to volunteer for all of those times and dates that we weren't able to teach ourselves, of which there were many. And specifically in 2024, I managed the office engagement component, which included everything from departmental introductions and tours to field trips and office scavenger hunts. That said, this year in 2025, after about 3 years of participating and running the program with my peers, I took a step back and I was no longer engaged with the PIC program on a daily basis. And for me, I do see that as a positive, not because I don't want to participate, but sometimes removing yourself is necessary for others to step up. And I really stand by PIC being a useful environment for younger staff to develop leadership skills if those opportunities are lacking within project work. And so if PIC is an investment in our profession's future by welcoming diverse students in, it's also necessary to talk about what we're doing to keep them. The next cluster of endeavors I want to talk about relate to ensuring retention of the least visible. It's necessary for our profession to employ strategies to retain talent at all stages of one's career, but it's especially important to not overlook the experience of architecture students before they enter the workforce. It's not uncommon for an architecture cohort to drop by 40 or 50% between freshman year and graduation. And while there are many factors at play, I believe that who is teaching, what we're teaching, and how we teach all play a role. So in my Flansburgh portfolio and resume, I wrote about my experience teaching at both Wentworth and Virginia Tech's Open Lab with Payette. As an African American, teaching architecture is something that's very near and dear to me. During my 8 years of architectural study, including my time at USC and Harvard GSD, I never had a single studio instructor that looked like me. And that was a large part of what drove me to teach a first-year design studio at Wentworth when the opportunity presented itself. I wanted to help fill that gap in representation and felt that Wentworth's diverse student body was worth that investment. Of my 16 students, more than half were of color, including 3 African American female students. And it should go without saying that our profession has struggled to recruit and retain African American women, resulting in this demographic accounting for less than 1% of all licensed architects. Moreover, the weight of being the first or the only person of any demographic in any industry is significant, and it's hard to envision oneself as being successful when relevant role models are just hard to find. It's also well understood that first year has a reputation for weeding out uncommitted students or ones that faculty just deem to lack a necessary affinity for design. And first year can often leave you feeling like the photo on the left, which is unfortunately of me. But given that precedent, I was proud of my ability to guide all 16 of my students throughout the entire semester without any of them dropping out. And looking back, I believe what makes transitioning into architecture school so difficult is not just the long hours, but how design thinking is introduced in such an abstract manner. At Wentworth, there's an excellent brief where students are tasked with creating abstract cubes that engage with air, light, and structure. And while it's a solid brief, if you combine projects like that with a traditional curricula of learning about architects that look nothing like you and projects that could not be farther from home, it can be a struggle for students of color to feel like what they're learning is relevant. And so as a teacher, I found that it's important for retention to make the connection between what they're learning about today and the possible relevance in their future careers. And it can honestly be just as simple as saying, I've been through this too. Here's an abstract model that I had to make in a graduate studio that then led to this section drawing, and that drawing helped me figure out, the circulation in this African American museum in Charleston, and that's ultimately what I really cared about. So transitioning to a slightly different experience, I've also had the pleasure of being a mentor for Virginia Tech's Open Lab Studio, hosted by Payette. It is a travel-based semester taught by multiple Payette staff, and it includes courses on design, fabrication, and professional practice. The program is currently in its fifth year, and for the last 4 years, each cohort has also included 1 to 2 students from Hampton University, a prestigious HBCU. And so here is an example of some of the student work from last year, actually from 2 of my students, Mika and Julia. The brief last year focused on a site in Nubian Square, and students were challenged to utilize a mix of adaptive reuse and new construction to revitalize a series of vacant lots while trying to stay true to the local vernacular. And in true open lab fashion, student pairings were able to choose the programs of their buildings after extensive site and community research. Now, there are probably more than a few people on the call that can geek out about the student projects better than I can. So I'm gonna keep my focus on just the program itself. And I think that's something that's perhaps underappreciated is the sheer amount of professional development that is crammed into one open lab semester. It's the perfect environment if you're unsure about whether the AEC industry is for you, and the opportunity to just exist amongst a diverse group of professionals from architects to visual designers to building scientists on a daily basis is pretty rare for an undergraduate student. Additionally, if you're all in on architecture, Open Lab is perfect for helping you take that next step. You're going through the photos from left to right. One moment you're a student, the next you're making cool models as a pay at intern, and then one day you're a full-fledged designer winning our annual bocce ball tournament. Life comes at you really fast. Open Lab is the epitome of using overhead time and money to invest in the future of our profession in a super direct way. And lastly, it's not lost on me that it can be a retention strategy for current staff as well. Myself and others enjoy teaching, and not having to deal with reduced work hours or an additional commute has definitely made teaching more accessible to staff that otherwise just wouldn't be able to engage. And before I talk about the next cluster of projects, I did want to stop and note that retention strategies don't always have to be driven by those at the top of an organization. When Jennifer Robinson and I were co-chairs of the BSA EDI network from 2023 to 24, it was very important for us that the events we hosted emphasized individual agency. So this slide is just a quick representation of the many things we got up to in that 2-year period, but I wanted to touch on one in particular, um, an event called Cultural Catalysts. So the BSA's EDI network hosted early to mid-career panelists from Gensler, William Rahn, CBT, and LDA, and allowed panelists and attendees alike to share examples of employee-driven policies, benefits, and events that have helped shape company culture for the better and fostered increased retention. And two initiatives from that night that really stood out to me were Cultural Heritage Months at William Rahn and Passion Mapping at Gensler. The first lets employees honor and share their cultures in tangible ways, while the second creates a safe space for people to articulate the kind of work that actually excites them and whether or not their current assignments reflect that. So both are small ideas with big impacts because they center people's voices and experiences. And so speaking of work assignments, I want to take a moment to shift gears and talk about the project work I've been a part of at Payette. Since 2022, I've been lucky enough to stay on a single project from design to construction, which can be rare so early in one's career. And it's been an incredible opportunity to grow alongside a project and see how details evolve once they leave the safety of our design studio. That project in particular is a new satellite campus for Boston Children's Hospital in Needham, Massachusetts. It's a striated brick structure tucked between Route 128 and the Charles River, and it features pleated corners and ribbon windows that echo the movement, both the cars and the water surrounding it. And these are some recent photos from construction. And so during design, I worked on tying exterior gestures into the main lobby. For instance, the large ACM canopy at the entrance continues into the vestibule at the same height, sort of blurring the line between outside and in. And to the south, projecting oval window creates a pocket of space that we turn into a playful bench in the cafe. And so the building is still under construction, but these images offer just a glimpse of where it's headed. And while design is what drew me to the project, construction administration has really kept me invested. You know, CA isn't really something you learn about in school, and frankly, I thought I would dislike it. And I assumed it'd be something that I just had to sort of grin and bear. But I ended up being really wrong, and I'm happy about that. And a huge part of that is thanks to my colleague Liz, who commands just so much respect on the site and models what good leadership looks like. If I had $1 for every time a subcontractor just walked right past me to get to her in those early months, I'd have more than a few dollars. But over time, you know, I found my own footing, and I've realized that successful relationships on site are built through consistency, competence, and collaboration. And so shown here are a few snapshots from sourcing the brick for the job to attending the topping off ceremony that capture a small part of that journey. And so for me, showing up authentically is part of that journey too, or my journey as a designer. I'm a Black gay male, and last year I co-led a lunchtime conversation with my colleague Michael Hinchcliffe about what it's like to be queer in architecture. It was, you know, an honest conversation. It was vulnerable, but it was also meaningful, especially given that my earliest professional experiences weren't always welcoming to that part of me, which is exactly why I anticipated really disliking CA. And these conversations aren't always easy, but they are super necessary. And uncomfortable conversations, in fact, are kind of my thing. As co-chair of the BSA's EDI network, we hosted an event literally titled How to Have Difficult Conversations and Not Alienate People. And it focused on talking across power dynamics, peer-to-peer and peer-to-superior. But we also recognize that these conversations must happen between firms and not just within them. And that's why in 2023, we organized what we called a temperature check. It was right as the grip of COVID on professional practice was starting to loosen. We'd all just lived through 2 years of radical change, but there was no consensus on what should stick. So we invited firms of different sizes to come together and talk honestly about what was working and what wasn't. We collected feedback both publicly and privately. People could speak up, jot notes on Post-its, or use an anonymous survey. And while the details varied, the takeaway was sort of universal. Every single firm still had work to do, and none of us had figured it out. And admitting that collectively was both humbling and motivating. And that brings me to the final chunk of this talk, and one of the most important, ethics. And I want to share a bit about my time on the BSA's ethics committee and also some personal unbuilt work that shaped how I think about the role of ethics in design. So I was elected to the BSA's Ethics Committee in 2022, and I worked alongside two great colleagues, Ashley Rao and Todd Pollock. For those unfamiliar, the Ethics Committee serves as both a knowledge base and mediating body when questions of professionalism, integrity, or competence arise. In short, if there's a dispute about an architect's conduct, we're one of the places people can turn. And while we're expected to know the AA Code of Ethics inside and out, the truth is that very few other architects outside of our committee are equally as familiar with it. And of course, grievances came across our desk from time to time, but I wanted to make sure that the committee wasn't only reactive. So I propose that we also take a more proactive role in helping members think about ethics before they found themselves in a bind. And that's how the Modern Ethics Initiative was born. It's a monthly series of short, thought-provoking scenarios that highlight the gray areas in practice and invite conversation. The prompts were open to anyone, and at one point, we even brought this series to Mass Art for a live session with students. And really, my philosophy is simple. It's never too early to start thinking about ethics. And in that vein, architectural ethics should not be abstract, theoretical, or distant from practice. Our projects, both built and unbuilt, should take important ethical stances on issues when appropriate. And a good example of this is my past GSD graduate thesis. Uh, my thesis was a counter memorial to victims of police brutality. And it's probably helpful to walk through the current events that both prefaced and followed my thesis. Within our profession, there were several high-profile memorials coming into being, but outside of it, violence and racial tensions were seemingly at an all-time high. And this led to the question of if architecture was capable of engaging with the issues I cared about in real time. My fear was that too many memorials for people of color in the US specifically were trying to neatly tie a bow around issues that weren't fully resolved yet. And after studying several dozen monument and memorial precedents, the first one that stood out as being different in a meaningful way was a monument against fascism in Germany. Designed by an artist rather than an architect, the structure was a sullen aluminum pillar sited in a pedestrian shopping mall. And the pillar invited citizens to write their names at its base, in effect committing to take responsibility for revolting against injustice. And as names began to cover its surface, the pillar was systematically lowered. The more people that participated, the quicker the eyesore fell. The precedent was labeled a counter monument by Holocaust scholar James Young, and it was literally the opposite of everything you think a monument ought to be. The intentional and unapologetic subversion grabbed my attention, and it led to me making sort of the set of drawings that you see on the screen that took the current set of monuments and memorials I was studying and emphasized how just slight alterations to notable structures like the Washington Monument, the Statue of Liberty, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and several others can drastically change their meanings. And from there, the project really took off. That deck of cards and my findings were translated into a design manifesto that guided everything about the project for the rest of the semester. Um, knew I would design a counter memorial. It should have a national and local presence. It should privilege Black aesthetics over politeness, be collective rather than singular, and be more transient than permanent. With those parameters in mind, I decided to site the project at both the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and at several local police precincts across the nation. The two sites are opposites. The mall is an extremely manicured open landscape, while police stations are often dull and heavily guarded. More than just opposites, the sighting of a police brutality memorial at a police precinct and within the National Mall, which is a landscape representative of American ideals, is truly unexpected. And this juxtaposition was inspired by artists like Tatsu Nishi and Mohammed Hassan, whose work brings together disparate things to challenge their meaning. And with Discovering Columbus on the left, Nishi built up scaffolding several feet into the air to enclose a distant and foreign statue within the familiar context of a living room. And furthermore, determining how the project should engage with this site was equally important as choosing one. At the National Mall, the Commemorative Works Act prevents any new monuments or memorials from being built in the monumental core. Therefore, I purposely cited my thesis within the shadow of the existing Washington Monument, which has a shadow so large that it effectively acts as a sundial. And so moving on to Black aesthetics, influences outside of architecture also helped carry the project forward. Of note was the militant all-Black ensemble of Beyonce's Formation performance and examples of athletes turning places of entertainment into spectacles of protests. I also knew that I wanted the project to be Black, like Anish Kapoor Black, like as Black as possible, and unprecious, a place for graffiti, commemoration, and essentially activism. I even designed neighborhood flyers advertising the project as an event. And so the third design parameter dealt with temporality. And we all know architecture is a very slow profession, with the average memorial to violence against African Americans being constructed 77 years after the event. And so, for example, the John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park was built 89 years after the Tulsa Race Massacre. And conversely, my thesis aimed to inspire immediate action. Interventions at police precincts and at the National Mall would provide citizens with places to organize both locally and nationally. The Counter Memorial would be the first of its kind to provide real-time accountability. And rather than an architecture that perpetrators of violence could ignore, the counter memorial's function was to systematically dismantle brick and mortar police precincts. And as a proponent of defunding the police, I began to play with the concept of dematerializing the police physically. And so shifting gears to sort of the fourth design parameter, I knew the counter memorial would be grand in scale, but it was important for it to read as a collection of incidents rather than be muddied as a singular form. At the time, or at a time where facts and numbers routinely fail to sway public conscience, the project needed to be more impactful than simply the sum of its parts. And so given that, I look to precedents like the London Mastaba and the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe, both projects that read as aggregations of repeating elements. However, a massive pile of objects was not enough given the counter memorial's multiple sites. I really needed a way to visually and mentally link objects that were sometimes hundreds of miles apart. An LAPD precinct could not be any further from the National Mall. Thus, I also looked at precedents like Rachel White Reed's concrete castings of negative space in residential settings and how rendering the invisible can reference enclosures that aren't there, or how anonymous ghost bikes sprinkled across the country suggest that bicycle safety should be a collective concern. And shown here are just some early studies of how I use cubes to very crudely demonstrate different masking strategies that I was exploring. And so eventually I landed on deploying a system of voids and counter voids to link my two sites. The voids on the left are pyramidal in shape and culminate in a convex lens-like tip. And placement-wise, they're meant to indiscriminately puncture the plans of police precincts every time a person of color is murdered. And for every void placed at a precinct, an equal and opposite counter void is placed at the National Mall within a large scaffolding. And so on the left are examples of the voids puncturing precincts, and the right image depicts the counter voids stacking to form an impenetrable wall at the mall. And so again, taken to an extreme, the process of voiding out police stations is a radical form of defunding the police by literally dematerializing their presence. In that way, precincts that fail to serve their community are destined to disappear rather quickly. And conversely, the more frequent the incidents, the taller the counter memorial grows. And so here is a plan of the counter memorial filling up over time and casting a large shadow on the National Mall. Um, and to sort of shift towards a conclusion, I'm going to end on a note about representation. I think how one chooses to represent their project can be key to jumpstarting the design process. And so I have an interest in narrative and writing, so I represented my thesis primarily through storytelling. Every image I made contributed to a larger narrative of how I envisioned individuals engaging with the counter memorial. I even wrote scripts detailing several possible scenarios. In the image on the left, there's an officer grumbling about being watched during a meeting by protesters within the void. These other images hint at how the counter memorial, like the media, can function as a keeper of records and a messenger of breaking news, although one hopefully with less bias. And for my presentation in school, I even employed the help of friends to record audio for each scene. And this was, of course, in the era of Zoom-only instruction. And so I'm going to take a moment to just flip through some of the next few slides for the sake of time. They are just examples of the project from multiple perspectives and vantage points. And also, I do want to say I had the opportunity to finally make a thesis model this May with the help of PAYET and the BSA. And a model of this project is currently on display on the second floor within the BSA. So here are some model photos. Thank you to Parke, Sandrine, Sophie, and Emily for all of the fabrication help. Here are example images of some of the voids protruding into police precincts at pretty unideal locations. Some model photos of the counter memorial at the mall at ground level. A rendering of the same thing. All right. So when presenting this project, typically, I conclude with a video question. I don't have that video here today, but I do have snippets from it on the page right now. And the video shows the project seemingly at its inevitable conclusion, lit aflame after the stacking of too many countervoids. And the question I typically ask is if there are ethical quandaries that exist too far outside of the realm of architects. And you are free to answer the question for yourself, but I believe the Counter Memorial and others like it have the potential to be beacons of accountability that hopefully discourage America's repetition, sorry, of the same violent patterns. And so that is all I have today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Calvin. That was really, really wonderful. And your work is so important and so very necessary right now. And so thank you for sharing it with all of us. I would love to get lots of questions from people listening and maybe just as a start, if you could, I'll start with a question. So one of the things that obviously resonates in how you talk about your work is that it's a really kind of layered process of personal initiatives or educational initiatives or advocacy that you're involved in and professional work. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you see those kind of complementing the kind of full professional and person that you are, and like how do you decide what to take on and when to leave it for other people to leave? Like how do you kind of work through that assembly?
I think that's a great question. I'm going to do my best to answer it. There's so many things that I'm interested in, but like ultimately, I feel like people need to bring their full selves to the profession. And even my graduate thesis was sort of born out of an unfortunate event that happened in undergrad, where I was confronted by the police and sort of detained unrightfully, and there was a time where I wrote about that experience, and everything just sort of like touched from one thing to another and led to a project. And I feel like um, the interest that I have is with people taking their life experiences, their interests, and turning that into architecture. I don't think there needs to be a bunch of the same type of architect out there. And so, what I'm trying to do at the core of my work is just encourage people um, and let them know that like there is room for you within the profession. Something that a past teacher used to say in undergrad is that, you only need one quarterback. And we can't train everyone that goes to design school to be the quarterback. And like architecture is such a rich, even AAC, a rich profession that just needs so many people with different skill sets and points of view. And I feel like sometimes we do ourselves a service, sorry, by discouraging certain types of people that don't fit a very specific mold. And so that's really what's driving a lot of the work that I shared today.
I had a question. I wrote it in the chat, but I didn't send it because it got really long and kind of embarrassing. Oh,
Never,
that was such a
Kyle,
great
never.
that was such a great presentation. This feels like so like following on that, this just feels like so in the weeds. But I was curious in seeing a lot of the work you've done related to like education and outreach and sort of like broadening the umbrella. I'm curious, like how you found funding for that work, both for like the programming and kind of for your labor. Because it feels like I know a lot of people want to do things like this, but then hit that stumbling block. And so I'm curious if that's stuff that you've found supportive organizations to partner with, or that you've gone after like competitive grants, and maybe if you could share that just so that other people on this call who are inspired by what you're doing could kind of pick up the mantle.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. And I hope my answer isn't, you know, unsatisfactory. I think two things. A lot of the work does include extra hours. I'm only responsible to my husband and two cats, and I'm sort of in a privileged situation where if I need to put in extra hours, that's possible. But I do just want to say, I'm an associate here at Payette, and we are an organization of a certain size where there is certain overhead that helps fund these things. And so, for example, with a lot of the professional participation that I'm a part of, if it happens during the day, whether it's a meeting, a BSA board meeting or something like that, or other, we have, a line item or billing number that you can use for that work. We also have some volunteer time off hours that people can use. And so it's a combination of almost me choosing to work in an environment where I'm allowed to sort of do these things and engage in the profession in a very particular way, the way that I want to. And I will say that's definitely why I'm here. As far as specifically some of the teaching, when I taught at Wentworth, I had to reduce my hours at Payette to account for the time there and the commute and everything. But so far, none of it's really been grant funded. It's just been asking people really nicely to move forward with my ideas. Even the thesis model that's so nice that that's Parke and his team putting up with me hogging the 3D printers in our office for like a month and helping me deal with all that. I think that there's potential for grant applications in the future if there's an alignment with the work I'm trying to do. Um, but where I work and what I do on a daily basis is very intentional because I want to be doing this type of work. And I don't feel like it's necessarily possible to everywhere yet, but hopefully in the future, yes.
Great, thank you. Other questions from the audience? And I see many Payette colleagues in the chat, so I'd love to hear any of your reflections or follow-up questions you might have.
I'll just quickly mention that, Calvin, what I really appreciated your portion of the discussion around architecture education and the intimidation factor and the entry point, and how that can be such a limiting factor for somehow the abstractness that often presents itself in early architectural education. So I think that's so important, and I think to the extent that you have been consistently shining a light on that and being able to bring that to things like the PIC, the high school internships we have here, as well as to the Open Lab Studio. I think bringing that perspective and that insight as part of how you support architectural education has been wonderful. And I'll just give a shout out to Calvin, who has also spent a long tenure on Payette's EDI committee and was also really vital to the advancement of our Just Label, continuation of our Just Label certification. So I'll give him a little bit of a shout out on that front as well in terms of his ongoing efforts to improve office culture in the profession. But that's not really a question, it's a comment. But I don't know if you want to talk any more about
Okay,
the
we'll take
architectural education piece.
I'll take comments too. Thank you, Susan. I'm glad that part resonated with you. I think teaching at Wentworth was such like a learning experience for me. And it just clicked when I was, sitting across from like 17, 18-year olds, and just having to convince them that what they're working on right now is relevant is hard just based on the way that we tend to teach architecture. And I think it's much more impactful if you're talking about their communities and how the work relates to their everyday life and the change they can make in the world rather than all the other things we like to talk about. Not that they're not important, but just realizing that maybe when certain things are introduced do matter to sort of keep people's interest, keep everyone's interest, honestly. And like I said, I am so proud of that semester of teaching because I can now say that those 16 students all had a Black like studio professor, period. Like those are 16 future architects in the world that can say they've had that. And even for all of the years that I spent in school, I can't even say that. At decent, institutions as well. And so I have always been very jaded about that. And then I think one day I woke up and I was like, well, why don't I just teach? If I don't see someone else doing it, why can't I just fill that gap? And so I'm glad that resonated with you.
Great, and we probably have time for one or two more if anyone wants to pick Calvin's brain.
Yeah, I'll
Well,
second that.
someone, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if folks do have questions, especially those who might be considering applying for the Flansburgh this year, I think that this is definitely a great opportunity to ask. Two past winners are actually on the call. So
Yeah.
yeah, or three, maybe three.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, that was going to be, if there were no immediate questions, it kind of gets at that, Wandy. I know when you are in the process of trying to capture like everything you've done as a professional and what is still the beginning of your career, there's a lot of kind of self-reflection and, you know, knowledge you gain just putting together a submission like this. And I'd love to hear, like, were you surprised by what you saw when you were able to step back and look at it all together? Were there any like ideas about what next? Like how did just the process of kind of putting together the application maybe make you think differently about all of the things you're involved in?
Yeah, well, it's funny when I was first looking to apply, I was like, well, I don't have enough. I don't have enough to put together, an application. And then by the time I got to the end of it, it's like, okay, I have too much. I need to take some things out. And so just editing, um, was key, but also I think the process itself was revealing in certain ways and just a great way to reflect on my own career and who I am currently as a designer and where I want to go and just making sure that like all of my efforts are aligned. We all only have 24 hours in every day, and our time is limited, and I want to make sure that the things I involve myself in are impactful. And so even with putting together this portfolio, I'm already thinking about like the next 5 years and the things I want to pour more time into or maybe pull back from. And so that's been a really helpful exercise. But I will say, like, it was daunting to apply. And so if there are people on the call thinking about doing it, just give yourself as much time as possible. Like I said, Andrea tried to get me to apply in 2023, which I'm glad I didn't because Kyle killed it. But it was like 2 weeks before it was due. And I was like, no, like that's not possible. Because I think I spent months, just slowly hacking away at it. But I'm so glad that I did.
As are we. Great.
I
Well,
do
thank
just want
you.
to,
Yeah.
sorry, I just want to quickly say thank you everyone for being on this call. All the pay it people, of course, you guys always show up for me, but all the non-pay it people as well. I'm very surprised and happy to see you here. Sorry, Kelly.
Yes. No, no, I was just gonna say thank you for sharing so much. I feel like there are like 12 deep dives you'll have to follow up with afterwards about like, tell me more about this, tell me more about that. But for now, I guess we'll turn it over to Wandy to close us out.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Calvin, for sharing about your experience submitting. Congratulations again on having received the award as well. I'm noticing a question in the chat, Joshua. How much emphasis on judging criteria is placed on built work versus work of service? I would say I think it might actually depend on who's on the honors and awards committee that year. I think that it does sort of sway, but we typically say, we recognize that this can be work that is submitted. Sometimes we have students submit, sometimes we have folks who have been working for a number of years. And so we never want to discourage anyone from submitting. And so it really is a balance on the work that you have done, period, and what it is that you want to highlight. And I think one of the biggest stressors always is there a cohesive narrative that actually cuts across your work? I think some of the winners over the years have had really strong narratives that have tied the work, whether it was built or unbuilt. And so that is something that can really get the reviewers to sit with, reflect upon, and then make a decision based off of that wouldn't eliminate or sort of like have somebody not be able to pursue that award. So amazing. And definitely a reminder, I know Calvin said that maybe 2 weeks is not enough time to do this, but you do have 3 weeks left to put together materials.
So, yes, very different, very different.
So hoping that alleviate some anxieties around submitting. We're also hoping that you might have already started to think about projects that you would want to put together for a submission. And a reminder that also, if you don't submit one year or you don't receive it one year, you can always apply during other years. This is one of those awards that it is free to submit. And so please feel free to keep applying if that is something that is of interest. And then a reminder to all of those that will be submitting, those submissions are due Friday, September 26th at 11:59 p.m. Definitely a reminder that if you are submitting and you have folks that you want to reach out to that would write letters of recommendation, please reach out to them as soon as possible. Sometimes we have stragglers towards the end there that are also submitting letters of recommendation relatively late. So please, please, please make sure that you stay on top of that. And thank you again, Calvin. Thank you, Kelly, for facilitating today's discussion and for opening up the room today. And so good luck to anyone that is submitting this year. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.